Type 2 diabetes diet plan. List of foods to eat and avoid. Type 2 diabetes diet definition and facts. Type 2 diabetes involves problems getting enough glucose into the cells. When the sugar can't get where it is supposed to be, it leads to elevated blood sugar levels in the bloodstream, which can lead to complications such as kidney, nerve, and eye damage, and cardiovascular disease. Foods to eat for a type 2 diabetic diet include complex carbohydrates such as brown rice, whole wheat, canola, oatmeal, fruits, vegetables, beans, and lentils. Foods to avoid include simple carbohydrates, which are processed, such as sugar, pasta, white bread, flour, and cookies. Pastries. Foods with a low glycemic load index only cause a modest rise in blood sugar and are better choices for people with diabetes. Good glycemic control can help in preventing long-term complications of type 2 diabetes. Fats don't have much of a direct effect on blood sugar, but they can be useful in slowing the absorption of carbohydrates. Protein provides steady energy with little effect on blood sugar. It keeps blood sugar stable and can help with sugar cravings and feeling full after eating. Protein-packed foods to eat include beans, legumes, eggs, seafood, dairy, peas, tofu, and lean meats and poultry. 5 diabetes superfoods to eat include chia seeds, wild salmon, white balsamic vinegar, cinnamon, and lentils. Healthy diabetes meal plans include plenty of vegetables, and limited processed sugars and red meat. Diet recommendations for people with type 2 diabetes include a vegetarian or vegan diet, the American Diabetes Association diet, which also emphasizes exercise, the paleo diet, and the Mediterranean diet. Guidelines on what to eat for people with type 2 diabetes include eating low glycemic load carbohydrates, primarily from vegetables, and consuming fats and proteins mostly from plant sources. What to not to eat if you have type 2 diabetes: sodas, regular and diet, refined sugars, processed carbohydrates, trans fats, high-fat animal products, high-fat dairy products, high-fructose corn syrup, artificial sweeteners, and any highly processed foods. What is type 2 diabetes? Type 2 diabetes occurs over time, and involves problems getting enough sugar, glucose, into the cells of the body. The cells use the sugar for fuel, energy. Sugar, glucose, is the preferred fuel for muscle and brain cells, but it requires insulin to transport it into cells for use. When insulin levels are low, and the sugar can't get into the cells where it is supposed to be, it leads to elevated blood sugar levels. Over time, the cells develop resistance to insulin resistance, which then requires the pancreas to make more and more insulin to move sugar into the cells. However, more sugar is still left in the blood. The pancreas eventually wears out, and can no longer secrete enough insulin to move the sugar into the cells for energy. Which types of foods are recommended for a type 2 diabetes diet? A diabetes meal plan can follow a number of different patterns and have a variable ratio of fats, proteins, and carbohydrates. The carbohydrates consumed should be low glycemic load and come primarily from vegetables. The fat and proteins consumed should primarily come from plant sources. What is the glycemic index? Which type of carbohydrates should be included? Glycemic index and load. Carbohydrates, carbs, are the primary food that raises blood sugar. Glycemic index and glycemic load are scientific terms used to measure the impact of a carbohydrate on blood sugar. Foods with low glycemic load index raise blood sugar modestly and thus are better choices for people with diabetes. The main factors that determine a food's, or meal's, glycemic load are the amount of fiber, fat, and protein it contains. The difference between glycemic index and glycemic load is that glycemic index is a standardized measurement and glycemic load accounts for a real-life portion size. For example, the glycemic index of a bowl of peas is 68 per 100 grams, but its glycemic load is just 16. Lower the better. If you just referred to the glycemic index, you'd think peas were a bad choice, but in reality, you wouldn't eat 100 grams of peas. With a normal portion size, peas have a healthy glycemic load as well as being an excellent source of protein. Carbohydrates can be classified as either complex carbohydrates or simple sugars. 1. Complex carbohydrates Low glycemic load foods, or foods that are a part of a type 2 diabetes plan, are in their whole food form and include additional nutrients such as fiber, vitamins, smaller amounts of proteins and fats. These additional nutrients slow down the absorption of the glucose and keep blood sugar levels more stable. Examples of complex carbohydrates, or low glycemic load index, foods include brown rice, whole wheat, quinoa, steel-cut oatmeal, vegetables, fruits, beans, lentils, grains and starchy vegetables. Whole grains, such as brown rice, quinoa, and oatmeal are good sources of fiber and nutrients, and have a low glycemic load, making them good food choices. Processed food labels make it very confusing to understand whole grains. For example, whole wheat bread is made in many different ways, and some are not that different from white bread in its blood sugar impact. Glycemic load. The same is true for whole grain pasta. It's still pasta. Whole grains have less of an impact on blood sugar because of the lower glycemic load. Choose whole grains that are still in their grain form like brown rice and quinoa, or look at the fiber content on the nutrition label. For example, a good whole grain bread will have 3+ grams of fiber per slice. Starchy vegetables that are good sources of nutrients like vitamin C, and that are higher in carbohydrates than green vegetables, but lower in carbs than refined grains. They can be eaten in moderation. Starchy vegetables include potatoes, squash, corn, other root vegetables. The above starchy vegetables are best eaten in smaller portions, 1 cup, as part of a combination meal that includes protein and plant-based fat. Non-starchy vegetables. Non-starchy vegetables, such as green vegetables, can be eaten in abundance. These foods have limited impact on blood sugar, and also have many health benefits, so eat up. Almost everyone can eat more vegetables. We need at least 5 servings a day. Fresh vegetables are a great option, and usually the tastiest option. Studies show that frozen veggies have just as many vitamins and nutrients because they are often frozen within hours of harvesting. Just check to make sure there aren't added fats or sweeteners in the sauces that are on some frozen veggies. If you don't like vegetables on their own, try preparing them with fresh or dried herbs, olive oil, or a vinaigrette dressing. Aiming to consume a rainbow of colors through your vegetables is a good way to get all of your nutrients. 2. Simple carbohydrates, high glycemic load foods, or foods that are not part of a type 2 diabetes diet plan because they raise blood sugar levels, are processed foods, and don't contain other nutrients to slow down sugar absorption, and thus these foods can raise blood sugar dangerously fast. Many simple carbohydrates are easily recognized as white foods. Simple carbohydrates or high glycemic index foods that should not be included in your diet. For example, sugar, white pasta, white bread, flour, cookies, pastries, white potatoes, breakfast cereals, pastries and sweets, fruit juice, pineapples, soft drinks, watermelon,